Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the first video of Car Plebs, where we take a look at the 911 996 Carrera 2. This particular car is from 1998 and has approximately 120,000 kilometers. We acquired this car in Poland with David, but nevertheless, as a preface to the overall discussion, I would like to mention a few key features of the 996 overall. It is one of the least desirable 911s as of today. It has been hit by the strongest depreciation of all of the 911s, but nevertheless, for me personally, it's one of the greatest designed 911s. Now let me elaborate on that for 1 second. The 996 represented a new era for the 911 and for Porsche for that matter, as it introduced basically the first water-cooled engine on the one hand side, and on the other, it had the very specific and controversial fried egg headlamps. Now many people consider them ugly. Personally, I do not, because basically what is behind this is the fact that Toyota was in fact involved on the collaboration in the design of the 911. And one of the key criteria of that design was to be more effective/efficient. So to increase basically the gross margins in terms of the sales of the car, so that Porsche could become as soon as possible more profitable. Now, basically what that means is that on each side, two lights consolidated into one, which personally doesn't bother me as it reminds me of the GT1 of the period. And on the other hand, I think it goes very well with the slender curves of the design overall. Now, what I was looking for was more of a daily driver as opposed to my 2S 997. The 996 also represents an incredible value currently when we look at the market, as it has depreciated and is consistently slightly rising year on year, at least from the observations that I have had. Now, this specific 996, I have found it on one of the Polish websites, and the buyer or seller at the time was listing it as pristine condition, but the price was one of the cheapest in Europe overall. So I was a bit cautious, but after receiving many pictures and history records and so on, I decided to send a deposit. Now, the journey itself was not easy. We had many hundreds of kilometers ahead of us. Nevertheless, we went out and we had a pre-purchase inspection with the current owner at Porsche Warsaw, where we took a deep dive into this specific example of the 996. Everything overall checked out, no major crash history, only one of the sides was ever scratched. So from that perspective, overall, the car was really a great deal, at least in my eyes. There were no major leaks, specifically around the RMS or any other region for that matter, which considering the age of the car was really good. So what was then left for me was to agree on the final price. We struck the deal and we went back. What I didn't expect on the way back, that it was the transition from autumn to winter. So it was the first day where actually we had some snowstorms on the way back and there was ice forming on the road, and it was overall very slippery. Now, normally I wouldn't care, but on this specific example, we had I think 7 or 8 year old tires and of course summer tires. So from that perspective, everything was super slippery. And on the way back, we witnessed approximately 3 to 4 crashes. But nevertheless, we finally made it home. We were extremely tired. And of course, along the way, it was one of the most stressful drives I've had, because of course, you are wondering throughout the whole journey, and it was approximately 800 kilometers, whether you're going to have oil consumption, whether there's going to be a leak, whether you're going to have cooling issues, and many other factors. But nevertheless, at some point we managed, and it was very much rewarding. Now let's take a look at the exterior of the car. Overall, I would judge the exterior in excellent condition considering the age of the car. It is in fact 22 years old, so we have to always bear that in mind. But I took a micron meter to the meeting as well as basically to the inspection spot, and everything checks out. It ranges from 200 to 250 microns, which is exactly what I would consider in spec for a second layer of paint. And in general, the car represents basically a good condition. Of course, here and there, what we will see are minor dings and minor spots of rust, but all of this can be basically tended to. Now, if we take a look at the rubber seals, overall, what I would consider they are in good condition. Especially on the sunroof, we had the good experience of driving in torrential rain as well as snow, and nothing basically came through, as well as during the car wash, basically the car is completely dry. Now, as we open the door, what we can notice is the first spot of rust. So basically here around the door locking mechanism, you can see basically pockets of rust. So this is going to be one of the first things we will tend to. And yeah, overall, I have to say it's in great condition. Now, one thing to note is that not all wheels are made the same. Of course, the 996 has these turbo wheels, or turbo twists as they are known, and not all of them are made the same. So these ones are so-called the hollow spoke, which decreases the unsprung weight of the wheel, thus basically increasing quote-unquote the performance, but nevertheless it's a great addition to find on your particular 996. And the easiest way of doing that is simply by putting your hand on the spoke itself and feeling whether it is round or indented from the mold itself. Speaking of which, the wheels were produced by BBS, and it's a pity to see that they recently filed for bankruptcy. Now onto the engine. Of course, you cannot do a proper pre-purchase inspection by yourself. This is a high recommendation from my side that you want a reputable indie Porsche specialist or Porsche themselves to basically lift the car, take a look for any leaks, but nevertheless, as you can see, we are currently in a forest, so that's actually quite difficult to do. As you can tell, our engine hood is being held up by a wiper blade. So this is quite common for the front hood as well as the rear hood to have failed hood struts. So it's quite a cheap and easy fix overall, but nevertheless, it's something worthwhile to mention. Now you want to take a good look overall at the engine. Inspect for leaks, inspect for perished hoses. What I would also highly suggest is to unscrew the caps from both the engine coolant itself as well as the engine oil filler tube, and you want to check for any buildup. Of course, on the side of the engine coolant, what you want to see is oil residue, or what you don't want to see in principle. And on the other hand, in the oil fuel cap or oil filler cap, you don't want to see any, let's call it milking, buildup, or any other residues as well. So that's basically a sign of a healthy engine. But of course, you cannot come to the logical conclusion just by doing those two things. But it's a good practice to do. What I would also recommend to do is to check for the AC hoses, check whether they are perished or not. And here is basically where you can see the cable throttle. What is worthwhile to mention that this is the last 911 to in fact have a cable throttle, as well as the hood / front trunk or fruit trunk are operated by linkage as opposed to electronic, which is of course a great thing to have. The next thing to do is to check the engine from the bottom. What you don't want to see are any leaks, moist, or anything like that. In this specific case, as you can see, the engine is completely dry. Now, what I want to mention here is that this is not sufficient for a pre-purchase inspection. This is simply the first thing that I would personally recommend to do when inspecting the potential candidate for your next car. I would want to spend a moment talking about the IMS issue, or intermittent shaft bearing. So of course, as we know, the 997.1/986/996 have had their fair share in the media as well as on the forums when it comes to the IMS bearing. What I would want to mention here is the experience of two mechanics who have worked on Porsches for 10 plus years, and basically they have said that in their careers working on these engines that has never happened. On the other hand, in my eyes, it's still an issue. My particular 996 doesn't have any service records indicating that the IMS has been changed. On the other hand, the first generation of the 996, or more specifically the years 97, 98, and 99, should have in fact the dual row IMS bearing itself, which is the preferred option to have. Supposedly with the year 2000, basically there was a shortage in terms of the dual row IMS bearing, so they installed a single row, and basically this was the problematic one, or the one with the highest percentage of failure. And now onto the interior. One thing I would want to mention is that this car is equipped with the optional sport seats. In general, the 996 is known to have not one of the best interiors. While I completely agree with the statement, on the other hand, I have to say that if I look at this one, it has held up incredibly well to time considering its age. Basically, I don't see any, let's call it perished materials, perished leather. Everything is rather what I would consider in excellent condition overall. So it's a nice thing to see and a testament to the quality in terms of build, despite people basically saying that the 996 doesn't have the best interior from a design perspective. I fully agree, specifically when I compare it to the 997, which does have a much nicer interior. But this is something that you need to decide on your own whether this is a big bother. So from my perspective, that was perfectly fine. The next thing I would want to mention is the radio. So my particular car has been equipped with a Blaupunkt. While this is perfectly fine because it is in fact German, so it fits the general theme of the car itself, on the other hand, it is extremely bright. This then translates to the fact that while driving at night, considering the luminescence of the gauge cluster and other buttons, it does take away some of your attention. Now, the first thing I have done since purchasing the car is I've spent a lot of time on eBay in Europe, basically to find a so-called CDR22 radio, which is basically era specific to the 986/996, and I have successfully found one. A nice notable feature is the fact that you can't equip that radio with an aux cable for changing the source of the media. So as opposed just to being stuck with CD as well as radio, you then have the additional feature of being able to, use your own media player of choice, be it smartphone or anything else. So my car in fact has a few notable quirks. Quirk number one is the steering wheel. So the steering wheel airbag is basically mounted to a metal plate that has 4 rubber grommets as shown on the picture. The problem with that is the fact that these grommets do like to wear out over a significant period of time, and again, considering the age of the car, this is exactly and precisely what has happened to mine. Now, this then translates directly to the fact that when you are having sharp braking, or let's call it a bumpy road, your horn does basically engage by itself. So I've had some funny situations where I was turning and basically there was a pedestrian on the road, and as I was braking to let this person pass by, the horn started honking and the person was, looking at me, what the heck is wrong with me, while I was waving my hands, both of them saying, sorry, sorry, sorry. They were still pointing their finger at their temple saying, what is wrong with me? The next thing is how you regulate the speed of the intermittent windshield wipers. So this is a button that you would normally associate with the regulation or basically adjustment of the volume on the actual radio. But here, as in a Fiat 126, you use it to regulate the speed. The next thing is the actual lever for the windshield wiper itself. So as you notice from every other normal car, you would have potentially 4 positions. Position 1 meaning off, position 2 meaning intermittent, position 3 meaning basically medium, and then you have 4 for high. Now in this car, I had the funny situation that when I just acquired it, I was leaving the parking garage. And I had it on position 1, and normally you would assume that this means in fact off, but it doesn't. In this car, it means basically the intermittent speed that is regulated by the volume dial itself. Then position 2 implies off, and 3 and 4 are medium and high respectively, so something to be quite cautious about when using the car. And to cap off the video overall, the sound of the exhaust. Thank you very much for watching the first video of Car Plebs. We already have some content prepared for the next videos. Again, please hit subscribe and take care.